I want to tell you about a house I lived in as a teenager. I'm not going to tell you the city it's in, but the name of the road is Patterson. So I refer to it as the house on Patterson. It was a house my family rented, through this property management company. And back then, the property management companies did not really like to fix up their houses. But this one was pretty good. The reason we were moving into it was because we were leaving a house that the slumlord just would not fix up. And my grandfather used to have to get on this guy all the time when he was alive, because he would not fix anything up. And that was the only time he would get out there, is when my grandfather pretty much told him off in no uncertain terms. But anyway, I digress. So we moved to this, nicer house. And we really thought we were moving up, because this one had French doors that led from the living room into what was supposed to be the dining room. And it had a little candelabra, dangling from the ceiling over where, a dining table would normally go. But we used that room as a den, because the kitchen was big enough for a kitchen table and everything. Now, I'm not going to say it was bigger than the kitchen in the previous house, but it was big. And the people who moved into this house were my brother and I, my mother, her fiance, my baby sister, who was only 10 months old, or barely 10 months old, actually, and because it was just before my 14th birthday. My grandmother, and eventually my aunt moved in. My mother's sister moved in as well when she was having troubles with her husband, because she never got along with his mother. He was a mama's boy, and you know how it is when you're with a mama's boy. There's nothing you can ever do to be the perfect wife or daughter-in-law to this woman. That's just how it is. So she always had problems with that woman. Anyway, at that time, it was the middle of winter, and it was snowing. It was snowing at night, and we were actually supposed to move in on a Saturday, and it would start snowing Friday afternoon, late afternoon, early evening. And my uncle, who had a pickup truck and was going to move us, help move us, he said, "You better move tonight," to my mom and my grandmother, because he said you might not be able to move in until Monday, if the snow sticks. So we just moved. And fortunately, there was a little bit of oil, because this house heated with oil heat, and there was a little bit of oil in it, so there was enough to keep us warm until we could get more oil in the tank. But the house we moved from did not even have, it was a very cold house. There were gas stoves in not every room, because the bathroom was permanently cold. We had to keep a kerosene heater back there just to take a bath. And so you would get in there and you would just try to get out, because the tub was always cold. I don't care how much hot water you put in it, it just never warmed up. And so we were glad to get out of there. We hated it. But we moved into this house, and that very night we moved in, my uncle's wife, my aunt, she told my grandmother, my mother, that the house was haunted. That was her word, haunted. And my grandmother just poo-pooed the idea of that, because she was like, she's jealous because we got this nice house. Because it was nice. It was pretty nice. It's always been a nice house. A corporation owns it now, and it looks even better inside than it did before. It kind of went down a little during the 90s, but because that's when that neighborhood started to go down. But it's a pretty nice house. Just have to admit it. But they want too much money for it than what it's worth, I think. So, it was an old house. It wasn't ancient. It wasn't a historical place. It was just old. That's all. Probably built in the 50s, I would think. A bungalow. So it looked longer from the side than it did from the front. From the front, you would look at it and say, this is a small house. But when you saw it from the side, you would say, oh, okay, it's not that small. So it was barely big enough for all of us. When my aunt moved in, it wasn't, but there were enough bedrooms anyway. And the yard, it was so. It kind of, it was type of hard front yard to mow. So the back was a little bit better, and you could actually drive your car up into the back and park back there. But those who had cars mostly parked on the street and just climbed the stairs, and it was hell bringing groceries in that way. So we started doing it from the rear. Yeah. And at first it was just, it was a nice house. It was okay. It was we were glad to be there. But there was something about the atmosphere that I began to notice. And it started with the crawl space that we referred to as an attic. It started with that. I used to sit up there and read at the top of the steps. Because there was a window to, a little window right there, because there was a little bit of closet space, and we kept some things there, and I kept books there. And I've always been a reader. I love to read, so that's why I'm always on the internet reading things and just writing stuff, because I've always liked that type of activity. And I've actually written some scripts and had some short films and even produced these 2 features of my own, which I'm going to have to use AI to edit, because I can't get anyone to edit it. Not for the price I can afford it. Right now, I'm just not a rich person living paycheck to paycheck. So anyway, I would sit at the top of these stairs and read these graphic novels a family acquaintance had given my brother and me. Not Halloween. What am I thinking? Frankenstein and Dracula. And I began to feel watch, and it wasn't the cat. She used to like to go up there, but a lot of times she would be outside, roaming the neighborhood. She never went out into the street. She wasn't that type of cat. She would just roam around in the yards and things. And I remember just, trying to tell myself that it was her, and it wasn't. It was something else. And that's when I started thinking, maybe this house is haunted or haunted. So, there was just not a way that you could point to it, though. You wouldn't see a figure in a corner or a shadow on the wall. It was just the feeling that when you were sitting in a room alone, you were not alone. That something in the house was aware of you. That it had been aware of you since before you even walked in the door. And I told myself it was just, the age of the house. It was old. Old houses have sounds, they have drafts, they settle and creak and they shift and all that. But, I was a teenager and I had an imagination and I read books and I wrote stories. And, I also was the type of person who noticed things, even at 14. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. My family is not a quiet family. We argue. We bicker. We have opinions. We express them. And sometimes that expression gets a little loud. That's just who we are. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. And a lot of times, substances would make us bicker even more. Now, I've never been into that stuff. I'm firmly against that type of lifestyle. I'm just not into it. But there are people in my family who are. And, like alcohol, for instance. It's like a generational curse. And, a lot of times when people get liquored up, they get, vociferous. But what happened in this house, it was just different. The conflicts that took hold of us there, the fighting, the backstabbing, and the way people turned on each other, it was different in kind from the ordinary noise of a large family under one roof. It was just meaner, and it was more corrosive. The relationship that had survived for decades started just fraying. My mother's engagement fell apart while we were living there. My aunt nearly left her husband. And people who loved each other said things that just couldn't be taken back. And I've thought about that a lot over the years. Whether the house did something to us, and whether whatever was in that place fed on conflict or created it, or both. You know, I don't have an answer. I just know what I observed while we lived there for 2 years. Now, I'm gonna tell you about the creepy basement. It had red dirt. It was not finished basement, and that's where, like, the oil furnace was. You know, the tank was outside, and it was just a creepy basement. I only went down there twice and never went back there again. And right across from it was this very small room, and that's where my aunt lived when she moved in with us. And no one else had to move out because neither my brother nor I wanted that room. We didn't want have anything to do with it. So she lived in there. And I remember one time, I don't know what happened, she had a kerosene stove back there, and it just swooshed one night. And she was using it to heat up the room. She wasn't even in there. She went back there, and it was just billowing smoke, and she had to open the window, which was a storm window. You couldn't, it was double paned, so it was like really weird. All the windows were like that in that house, and the screens were the type, they would fasten in such a way it was hard to even get off. You would have to like use a screwdriver or something to get those screens off. And so she had to open the back door and everything just to air out the room. And when she, you know, when all was said and done, the smoke had, you know, stained the walls. And when she took down her pictures and everything, where the bare spaces were, it looked like demon faces. Because she had these 2 African statue heads that she would hang up, and it looked demonic. Even she thought so. But no one really thought anything. We just thought it was something with the stove. And then it was a time when she was gone with her husband. He had gone off to work in Atlanta doing whatever, and he came, you know, to visit, and so she went and stayed with him. But she didn't go over to their house because of his mother. I think they went to a motel and stayed. And because his mother was actually trying to take custody of their daughters from my aunt. That's the type of woman she was. She was a really, I mean, she could be something else. I mean, she was always nice to my brother and me, but she was just something else to my aunt. I guess because she was married to her son, her only son. But I'm not going to speak ill of the dead. I'll try not to. But when my aunt came home, there were rocks and gravel and dirt just strewn across her floor, like someone had thrown them through the window. But the window was closed, and like I said, the screen could not even be taken off, and you couldn't throw rocks through the window. It wouldn't get through there. Not even the dirt would get through there like that. And we just could not, for the, you know, we just couldn't, to save our own lives, we just couldn't figure out how that happened. We just couldn't. And plus the window wasn't even up. It was like someone just threw it through the window. You know, the direction it was in. And I thought it was like something getting after my aunt, because my aunt had always been like a very mean person. She and I we didn't get along in that house at all. We didn't get along much anyway, but in that house we really didn't. My aunt was the type of person, you know, because my grandmother favored my brother and me, and everybody said it was because our skin was lighter. And she was one of the main people who said this. And before my grandmother passed away, she actually told me that she lay dying, but I didn't know at the time she was dying. She told me that she had always loved my brother and me and my younger cousin, my other aunt's son, the best. And, you know, I never told anyone that. So if they hear this, they'll probably be no wonder, but it is what it is. There's nothing they can do about it. She's been gone for over 30 years now. Anyway, and then the animals started suffering. Our dog got sick. Now my other aunt, the one with the son, this was her dog, and for some reason my great aunt didn't want us to have a dog. She thought me and my brother would beat it up or whatever. Not that I care. Because like people in my family could be something else. If you didn't have anything to give them, a lot of times they would not even want anything to do with you if there was no money involved. My great aunt was like that. I mean, I love these people, but they had some faults, some serious faults. So, but she gave this other little mutt to my other aunt, you know. But for some reason, we weren't good enough to get one. And I never forgot that. And it's probably another reason I became a more of a cat person. But anyway, the dog got sick. And I don't remember the specifics of the illness, because I was more into my book reading, even though I loved animals more than I loved people. I didn't like people at all. But, you know, I remember the dog had to be put down. She had to be... I mean, we took her to a vet and they said there was nothing can be done. She just stopped eating and everything. So that was a loss, and it hurt. And my grandmother's cat, you know, just vanished. The cat was there, and then the cat was not there, and we just never found out what happened to her. And, you know, people in my family, especially, I mean, I don't know what it is with black people, but they seem to think cats are evil, but they'll love a pit bull to death. And this cat wasn't a bad cat, you know, she just was her own thing. That's how cats are. They're the type of animals, they don't need to make people love them or do things, bark and, you know, make a bunch of noise and act stupid the way mutts do, a bunch of dogs do. And my grandma loved that cat, so she was extremely hurt. And to lose both the animals in that house within a short period of time, you know, I just never really stopped thinking about it. And then there was the kitchen light. One night I woke up and or maybe I'd never been really asleep, and the kitchen light just came on. And I got up and went in there because I thought, you know, someone was in there. And I was wondering why they were up that late, because people in my family just didn't get up like that. And there was nobody in the kitchen, and I don't even know if I turned it off. I jumped back into bed. Just like the time my brother and I were sitting up late watching a horror movie, and I don't know what happened, but we went to bed, and he was scared to go to bed because he didn't want to go to bed by himself, and it was just crazy. We really thought something was in there. That wasn't the only time that something freaked us out. And another time I was sitting up watching a movie by myself, and I just, you know, looked through the French doors, you know, expecting to see something in the living room, somebody, and there was nobody. And I turned off that TV and just took off, and I jumped in the bed. I don't even know if I changed clothes. I don't even know if I put on my gown. I just ran in there and tried to hide under the covers. And then there was the slugs that just started coming up out of the toilet. Slugs. They just came up out of the toilet. It was weird. And then it was like, I don't know what it was, just streaks of something coming down the walls or going, I don't know, it was just strange. In the bathroom, this weird streaks of something. It was like something out of the Amityville Horror, but true. It was just crazy. And then another time, you know, near the end of you know, our time in the house, during the last year, I was sitting in the living room. No one else sat in that living room but me. They stayed in the den because that's where the TV was. I would sit in the living room and I would draw and write stories, and I would read. And I was sitting in there, I'm not sure if I was reading, writing, or drawing, but someone set my name right at the window. My first name. Nobody calls me by my first name in my family. They refer to me as by my middle name, the shortened version. And I looked up and I said, "What?" Thinking that maybe it was my mom's, you know, fiance. Thinking he was playing with me for some reason, trying to, you know, use another name, kind of disguise his, I mean, not use another name, but trying to disguise his voice. And there wasn't anybody there. He wasn't there. I mean, I remember pressed my face against the screen. I couldn't see anybody out there. And I went looking. He wasn't even home. He was still at work. And it wasn't my brother. He couldn't even make his voice sound deep like that then. It was a man's voice. And, you know, I was just freaked out about it. I was afraid to sit in there at night after that. I still did, but not right after that happened. And then another night, for some reason, it was just me, my brother, and my baby sister in the house. There was like this little party house nearby, and My mom and my grandmother and my aunt, they were all over there. And we were just sitting there talking about something, and all of a sudden we heard footsteps on the back porch, and the screen door opened, and the back door opened. So we heard the knob turn, and then and I called out. My mom's, thinking it was her, and no one answered. The door just shut, and we opened the door and looked out, and there was nobody there. And we just jumped up. My brother ran to the kitchen and grabbed a big butcher knife out of the drawer, and I ran in the bedroom. And we got my baby sister out of my mom's room, and we took off. We went out the front door and ran over to that party house. And the man who ran it, he got his gun, and he went flying over there with my mom and aunt. And the back door was locked. They couldn't get in it. And so they ran to the front, and there was nobody in the house. We had left all the lights on and everything. But there was no way that anybody could have come in. The back door was shut. The screen door was latched. Even, and the back door was, the deadbolt and everything was on it. So how could it have gotten in? And if something had come in and shut all that, why wasn't there anybody in there? There was nobody in there. They looked. There was nowhere they could be hiding. They looked in the basement and everything. And I was just so scared to go to bed that night, because I knew that whatever had happened, it wasn't human. I knew it was demonic. So when we moved out, I was so happy. I don't think I've ever been that happy to leave a place in my entire life until I lived in some worse places, probably in the 2000s, in the 2000 teens, in fact. And you'll hear about those in these other episodes. It just felt like sitting down something very heavy that I've been carrying for 2 years without realizing it. And but the relationships with my family, they never really fully recovered from this. All the damage done during those years in that house was permanent. My mother's engagement was over. And there were things said between people that I loved, and it left marks. Like when I had an argument with my aunt in that house, and I was just so angry, I wanted to slap her. I wanted to hit her. And she wouldn't let me go to this Halloween party they were having at this assisted living place she worked in, because she was a nurse. She only let my brother and her daughter go, and my other cousin. And I was like, I don't want to go anyway. I'm too old. I don't want to go to that party. I don't know why I got mad at her, but I did. I said something nasty to her, and I went and apologized. And like I said, she was one of those people who was, she could be just the type of person who, if you said something not even that smart to her, she would get pissed off at you and will stay that way for a while. And I felt like I didn't need to apologize to her. So I didn't. I never did. I kind of felt bad about it when she got sick and passed. But, it is what it is. But, I thought about this a lot. Whether it was that house or whether it was just life. Whether we would have fractured anyway under the weight of everything we were, dealing with at the time. Maybe, I don't know. But I know it's that it happened there in that place, and nowhere before or after felt quite like that. Not until the 2000 teens anyway. So I lived in these two houses that were both over 100 years old. I never heard of my name being called in those houses, but I did hear some other things. So that's how it is.